Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We were working out some technical difficulties on the back end, so I'm going to kind of give us a minute or two for a few more people to join. I'm glad that you joined us tonight. I'm excited about tonight because we have been trying for almost a year to have these two speakers come and join us, so I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Just in case you aren't familiar with the Conservancy, a couple of bullet points here. We are the only national nonprofit organization that identifies, acquires, and preserves the most significant archaeological sites in the United States. We were established in 1980. That puts us at about 45 years, and we've preserved nearly 600 sites across the nation. Our preserves represent a broad array of time periods and cultures, and tonight you're in for a treat to find out about one that is very special. If you have not visited our website, it's easy to get to. It is thearchcons.org, and we have all kinds of information there, including an archive of all of our virtual lectures. And so if you missed one and you want to go back and revisit, you can do that there. You can also take a look at our tours, our preserves, and our magazine, which is kind of our flagship item. A couple of reminders. I would love it if you ask both of these guys, plus their special guest, questions. But the way we would like to do it is to collect the questions for the end so that we don't interrupt their presentation. There is a Q&A section down at the bottom. Find your menu down there. Type your questions in there. If they're super easy, Lindsay and I will try and answer them real quick. If not, we'll hold them until the end. And if we run out of time, yes, I will gather up questions and we'll have Tom and Franky answer those, and then I will get back to you with a follow-up email. If you're having any kind of technical difficulties with Zoom, first thing I would suggest is to look up in the upper right-hand corner. You've got some options for how your Zoom displays. Sometimes that can solve your problem. And also you can find your way over to the Facebook page. We're live streaming and it's good to go. The recording of tonight's lecture will be put onto YouTube. It typically takes me about a half a day to do the closed captioning, but you are welcome to go check that out. I will send a follow-up email with that link to you as soon as it's ready to go. So with that, I want to end my slide share, and I'm going to toss things over to our Midwestern Regional Director. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Lindsay. Lindsay Scott is, gosh, Lindsay, how many months now? Just a few, right?
Yeah, about 4.
Yeah, so we're thrilled that you're with us, and I'm really glad that you want to do the introduction for our speakers tonight. So I'm tossing it over to you now. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. So yeah, everyone, thank you for coming on and joining us tonight for our lecture. We are joined by Tom Trow and Franky Jackson tonight. Tom has been the leading archaeologist spearheading this project with the Mower County Historical Society and tribal communities. He first encountered this site, the Grand Meadow Chert Quarry, when he worked at the Minnesota Historical Society and first recorded the site actually in 1980. A few decades and 2 careers later, Tom returned to archaeology and the Grand Meadow Chert Quarry site. We are also joined tonight by Franky Jackson, an enrolled member with the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate tribe. Franky is a cultural resource specialist and tribal historian and currently serves as the compliance officer for the Prairie Island Indian Community Tribal Historic Preservation Office. He has devoted his career to developing innovative processes for cultural resource management by working closely with communities and organizations to promote and preserve the many cultures and histories that represent Minnesota. Together, these two have pioneered the way for creating one of the Conservancy's first archaeological and cultural preserves, with an interpretive trail set to open this spring. And tonight we get to hear about the latest updates for the opening of the new trail system and the collaboration that brought this preserve to life. So with that, Tom and Franky, please take it away.
And thank you, Lindsay. The special guest that Susan mentioned is Dan Wendt. And there's Dan. He has been a partner to this project since day one. He's been with us every step of the way, and he's there because he's an expert on chert, both its sources and identifying any given material that happens to land in his hand. He's been the person who's created the state's comparative collection for lithics, and he himself is a flint knapper, which gives him special insights when looking at artifacts and making identifications. I've asked Dan to be here so that if questions come up that might be specifically in his wheelhouse, that he's there to be able to answer them for you, either now or later. He'll also be able to respond if there's too many at the end in writing. Um, Let me begin by saying that this is the archaeological and cultural preserve. All the properties of the Archaeological Conservancy are in fact archaeological preserves. Um, that's the whole point. But we've added the word cultural on purpose. This is meant to be a project that's attractive to members of the descendant communities, the people whose ancestors created this site. And in that sense, it's not just an archaeological or historic place, it is a living, breathing place as part of their culture and their lives. And we wanted to make sure that they understood that we understood that as we worked. There we go. So just to get us all oriented, this is southeastern Minnesota. That's Iowa to the south, Wisconsin to the right, and it is the drainage basin of the Root River that you see in shade. This is an area that was investigated by the statewide Archaeological Survey back in 1980 when I was a field director for the survey, and that's when we first heard about the Grand Meadow Chert quarry. Since then, we've added the Dakota name for it, Wahni, which was contributed by an elder from Mittawakaton, who chose it because it's the tradition in Dakota place naming very often to refer to the resource that's present there. Why is that place valuable? So this phrase translates to "there is chert here." I want to go back to William Henry Holmes back in 1894. This is a treatise he did on a particular quarry down in Oklahoma, in which he was talking about the fact that there's an awful lot of church showing up at archaeological sites, but very few places where we know where they came from. At this point, he hadn't even seen very many workshops, let alone habitation sites or quarry sites that were directly related to acquiring the stone. And so he made this prediction. He said that it's apparent to the student of flaked stone tools that the existence of great quarries must be discovered. These quarry sites, if such as there are, maybe sorry about that, maybe hidden away in wild and rugged regions and obscured by forest, so the detentions of white settlers has never been called to them. That describes exactly the circumstance we're in. He was just perfectly predicting that our site, which is represented here in this small patch of 8 acres of woods in around farm country in southeastern Minnesota, our site had been lying hidden all this time. Since the last people who worked there walked away 600 years ago. Even our friends in each of the potentially descendant communities had no oral histories about it. So it was completely hidden, and nobody locally seemed to know anything about it, except for Maynard Green. Maynard Green on the left grew up 4 miles away, and as an adult was a rock collector and an amateur archaeologist of a kind. He amassed a very large collection by walking sites, and he pretty quickly figured out what this was. His colleague over there is Merle Rager on the right, and the two of them were friends and went out artifact hunting together. I started with this slide because I want to emphasize the importance of working with local wisdom and knowledge as archaeologists. There's so much information out there that if we don't trust and work with collectors and collections, we lose a lot of valuable information. And these guys have been terrifically reliable sources of information for us over the years. Maynard had tried for about 30 years to get, once he figured it out in 1952, to get somebody to come take a look at it from the archaeological community. And he knew that what he had in there, as he wrote in a letter, was he put it as I think this is an ancient Indian chert mine. And actually he said flint mine, because chert and flint, of course, had the same things. But I think in part his confidence came from walking the acreage around the site. You saw already that it's plowed fields completely surrounding that little oasis of woods. And those plowed fields have, without exaggeration, millions of broken pieces of what turns out to be Grand Meadow Chert. Some is frost cracked, some is plow cracked, and some, of course, is worked coming out of the quarry and very, very densely distributed there. It's how we knew when we first showed up that he was right. In addition to looking at those strange holes in the ground that some people locally thought had been made by a World War I bombing range, that people were going by in biplanes and dropping small bombs because it looked like that kind of displacement of dirt. But once you walk in there and you can see that there's evidence of chert even within the quarry under the leaves, as my partner here, Lee Radzak, and I did, you pretty quickly figure it out. In fact, we were stunned by the whole site. It's an amazing place. It feels as though that everything is either a hole in the ground and then it's backfill pile, and then another hole in the ground, or there's nothing flat anywhere. Very, very rarely do you find a flat spot. And if you do, it's a pit that's been filled in during the construction of another pit, when they were taking basket loads of dirt and pouring them out. Sometimes they needed to take the dirt further away from the hole they were digging. Maynard Green, when he was interviewed in a TV news show, said a few years later that he remembered the moment that he brought Lee and me in and said that the way he phrased it was, "Those boys pert near lost their minds." We did. It was true. So I got excited about the site, of course, in the middle of all the rest we were doing during a survey. But this was the only one that I picked out to talk about at a presentation of our Council of Minnesota Archaeology in Mankato in 1981. And I had the chore of trying to figure out how to convince my colleagues that we were right about this, that this in fact was a chert quarry. We didn't want to do too much digging or anything, so we limited that. We did one test trench, and that was it, just to verify what we were thinking was true. But we also were looking for other means. So I went to the map library at the University of Minnesota and found the 1968 flyover air map aerial view in order to at least represent the quarry. But I didn't expect this, which is the neighboring land owned by the farmer across the way, Clemens, who was interested in getting rid of his woods. He'd been waiting a long time and they were taking up space and he wanted to have plowable land. So he went ahead and cut down all the trees just before the airplane came by. All the trees had been cut and removed. But what he did is he exposed the pattern of the quarry pits there in the photo just for us to plainly see. This is affirming exactly what we see inside the woods. But what was especially advantageous to us is that knowing this is what happened on this piece of land, which in our time was already plowed field and nothing could be seen. It's located just right over here to the west of his house plot there. That meant we could go and look at that piece of ground, see what the density of material looks like, exactly what kind of debris and debitage is there from the chert quarry work, and then keep walking and see where that stops happening. So what we did is we walked all over the entire area and found what we thought were the boundaries of the distribution of the material that indicated subsurface pits. And then we drew that line as a large oval and called that the site. So this is the 175-acre Grand Meadow Chert quarry, the quarry itself, with an arrow pointing to that little piece of woods that the Archaeological Conservancy is protecting. That's only 8 acres, and we refer to that as the preserve. So just to keep clear, if I'm talking about the quarry, it's 175 acres. Otherwise, I'm talking about the preserve as the woods. Later, we found this, which is a map created by the Geological Survey of Minnesota. And by great coincidence, they had a line drawn to the diagonal just to the south of this to reveal what it looks like under the ground at the Grand Meadow Chert quarry, on the ground, on top. But of course, below the surface, this is the bedrock there. And the oval that you see is sitting on top of the limit of where the quarry pretty much could have been. The reason I say that is you can, on a topo map, I'll show you, you can see that the ground keeps rising. And eventually digging pits would have gotten impossible. So the distribution of Grand Meadow Chert, which is on top of this salmon-colored bedrock, limestone bedrock, was limited in this area just to that small part. And the parts outside that circle, in fact, were too deep for people to have dug by hand. This is the side view that I mentioned, that the diagonals that had cut through Grand Meadow, the town, and had shown the different layers of oceanic episodes depositing limestone and dolomite in the area. And in fact, here's that same salmon layer that is the source of the Grand Meadow Chert that we have, which is sitting on, as a cap on top of that. And at the same time, you're looking at the glacial debris coming over from the Des Moines lobe as it's heading east. And you see it's the thinnest expression of the glacial debris and the highest expression of the bedrock, coinciding and making it absolutely perfect for people to have come along and found the chert nodules there. And they did. They came and found chert for at least the last 8,000 years, possibly even longer. The point on the right is from a Bisenkill site in Granite Falls that and that stratum at that site was dated to almost 8,000 years ago. So we've got a solid date for that particular piece from Grand Meadow Chert. And over on the left is one that's walked in the door recently in Houston County that may actually be a bit older, but is less reliably documented. As you may know, in southeastern Minnesota, there is a lot of chert, and with the river, you can go in many, many places and find chert sources, lenses still in their limestone that were exploited by people coming along and needing chert and taking it out, chipping it out, or in fact, finding some that have been eroded and fallen to the ground. But the idea of chipping stone from stone is the typical quarry work going on. It's very, very difficult. Certainly some random finds of chert happens in glacial till as well. But most of chert quarrying activities in Minnesota involves stone and hard work. This, however, is a slightly different circumstance. This is a bed of chert formed as nodules. This is the creek cutting through Grand Meadow, the Grand Meadow Chert quarry area, called the South Fork of Bear Creek. And even today on the stream bed at the side, you can pick up nodules that are still eroding out of the stream bank as the river tends to meander a little bit and cut through fresh sources of the old nodules. We think that's what happened. For 7,000 years, all of the chert that anybody needed could be found by simply walking along the two creeks that are within that 200-acre area and picking up the nodules and making your tools, or taking the blanks back and making your tools back home. That doesn't explain why the pits are here. So what changed and why are we seeing these pits? The pits look like this now after a large project to remove buckthorn. And it's that rolling landscape I was talking about. This is pretty much what it looked like when we first showed up, 40 years before the buckthorn did its thing. But it's pretty clear that there was a lot of labor here. However, it's easier to dig through dirt than it is to chip out stone, and some of these pits got enormous. Again, it's a question of, well, how do you explain that? And so I also had to be prepared at that talk in Mankato for answering that question. This is the topographic map that shows the stream bed here at 1290. And we were determining that Grand Meadow Chert, in its relatively flat bed as it comes up under here, that's our preserve, of course, it's probably pretty flat. And as it goes up from here, the pits now get much deeper, and that's why to get at the chert, they had to dig deeper holes. And as they dug the holes deeper, they had to be wider, and so that sort of explains the landscape as we see it inside the woods. But we don't exactly know at this moment what inspired someone to step outside of the stream bed and start digging the first shallow hole and then work their way up. But it must have been some increase in demand, increase in need. Certainly, there's various explanations for it, but this below in the foreground here in your photo is the creek that I'm talking about, and there's our woods up at the top. And I think what happened is, as they did that, they stepped out of the hole and started digging. They kept digging progressively deeper, and I assume even that they probably followed the contour of the creek for as long as it was possible before they stepped out and dug the next sequence of deeper holes. We don't have a good sense of how long that took. We don't have any dates from this site yet directly, But the dates we have that we rely on are all about when the church shows up in villages where the dates have been measured and they've been determined through excavations. This is what we think the site might have looked like after that first early maybe a couple of decades, or we don't know how long it took to dig all the holes, but in the beginning, this is just the southern part of the site towards that little creek that winds through, and then the trees in the background are the bigger creeks, the South Fork of the Bear. And this is before our woods, which would be up here to the left, even began to be dug. We suspect that this was an oak savanna, and that for reasons that we've been investigating. But we also think that it's a place that probably attracted a lot of people throughout the summer months, and did so perhaps seasonally, perhaps spring and fall. But let's go to the next big question, which is, how did they dig these pits? They didn't have shovels, they didn't have metal tools, they had to do it with what tools were available. And again, we're relying on another source of data for this, primarily the quarries at Knife River Flint and in North Dakota, where Knife River Flint is derived, particularly the Lynch Quarry, where there's been a lot of research into this exact question. So what we think they did is they started with a knife made out of chert, and ironically, possibly even a Grand Meadow chert knife like this one, to cut the sod. Once they've cut the sod, the next step is to begin chopping the sod with a digging stick and loosening it. As you get the dirt below the sod loosened, and you start to move on down and get more and more dirt available, now you need a hoe. This is a hoe made out of a bison scapula, in order to, the shoulder blade of a bison, in order to scoop the dirt into a waiting basket, where someone, and perhaps a little train of people, would be taking the basket loads of dirt out and pouring them around the rim, causing that odd landscape that I keep talking about, and sometimes pouring them into other areas that, in fact, were just old abandoned pits from previous work, and filling those up with those basket loads. But nonetheless, this is what they were doing in order to get at the chert. And they worked undoubtedly in teams, and undoubtedly simultaneously, just because I think that there may have been good reason for people to come here at the same time, or to have the same schedule in the early spring to retool, and before the big bison hunt, possibly in the fall coming back, or possibly before the fall bison hunt. It's more speculation, because we still have not done the level of excavation necessary to answer all these questions. These are the nodules. This is what they look like down on the bottom of the pit. So when they reach this level, they can stop digging and start taking those nodules out. What they would do with them then is hand them up to someone up on the edge of the pit to evaluate. This is a photograph of the one subsurface work that was done, a trench that was just done to establish the actual level of the chert layer, and to determine the context for the wall of one of the pits. And we never did find the original ground level. The stratigraphy is so completely cattywampus, we could not see where the ground really was there. So they'd hand the rock up to a napper, someone with some expertise in determining quality of stone, who would hold a hammerstone in one hand and put the rock on an anvil stone. So this is one of the, so far, 5 anvil stones we found inside the quarry area. There were many more that have been found out in the plowed fields that are much, much smaller. So they had some small ones that were done with used with even smaller nodules. But we have found enough of these to think that, just as at the Lynch Quarry in North Dakota, that they had a napper working when they took the Knife River Flint out of the ground, and using an anvil like this. And those anvils are still scattered across the landscape, and they roughly run about 1 per 4 to 6 pits. So in other words, you don't need a big boulder at every pit. You just need somebody near enough by that they can readily assess the quality of the stone you're bringing out of the ground. And in their moments of less activity, probably beginning to make some artifacts. This is a hammerstone. There's been a few. Maynard Green had quite a few in the collection, and we found some back in the first analysis of the site when we were there. There we go. And then looking into the nodule itself, this is a sense of the quality of the stone. It's considered to be extremely good stone as chert goes, and is popular over a certain period of time for certain tasks. And that's what we talk about in the signage that we do. This is an example of one of the interpretive signs that have been created with Prairie Island Indian community to help us interpret the site and communicate to visitors what we think was going on there. All of these sites are in English, and I'm sorry, all of these signs are in English and Dakota, and all of them had been reviewed by our colleagues there and at Lower Sioux community, and we've had a terrific amount of help in figuring out how best to express the information that we want to impart. And it was a good challenge to take on, because our goal was not to just prepare it for the general public. We wanted a first level of target. We wanted to be able to inspire and inform the youth in communities that were potentially descendant communities and whose ancestors may well have been the very people who dug these pits. So that's the first level of interest we had in doing the signs in the way we've done them. And so for that reason too, we recruited Cole Redhorse, who is the artist that made the series you just saw a second ago. And we put one of his images here on this sign as well. Cole's a Dakota artist from Prairie Island. If you haven't seen someone do flint mapping, it's really fascinating. This is Dan Wendt.
And I think the edge now is to get a smaller.
Because the edge angle is so steep, I really didn't need to grind the edge. It was already.
And just to say, that's not Grand Meadow Chert, of course, but it's a good illustration of how he uses the baton. And Dan tells me that he sometimes uses 3 batons at different stages from different animals, different antlers, and using them for getting a different kind of flake and flake size off of the piece. In other words, of course, you start with rock on rock, but eventually you go from that kind of percussion to this fine-edged percussion that's accomplished through the antlers. The most common artifact made from Grand Meadow Chert is, in fact, hide scrapers. So that's what we have here, and it would be hafted to a baton like that, a stick, and wrapped in leather, and then used in this sort of a way by women in the village who would scrape the hides. One side, if they wanted to get all the, just have the skins be flat, but the fur on the other side for robes or like a rug in a teepee. But otherwise, they would do both sides. And of course, there's a huge number of ways in which those skins were used: drums and shields and teepees and sometimes clothing, although other hides are easier to wear. But that's another aspect of the story we're telling in these signs. This one about how people relied on buffalo, and that box you can't see very well is is going to depict all the different uses there are for various buffalo parts, and how the bison was just so essential for everyday life to people on this plains prairie border where we are, or this prairie woods border where we are. But the real point here is that nothing in that box is available for exploitation without chert. You need a chert scraper, you need a chert knife to get the meat off the bone, you need chert tools to kill the beast in the first place. So one question is, whose ancestors do we think these are when I talk about the descendant communities? And our best guess so far is that it's most likely people who are among Minnesota's 4 Dakota communities, and the Iowa, who have left Iowa and are now further south, and the Ho-Chunk Winnebago. All of these peoples have been displaced since early contact, and that makes it harder to figure out. But what's important too to know is that these aren't exactly it's not so easy to talk about because these are not the tribes that existed then. There wasn't really a tribal level of community organization at the time the quarry was being utilized, which would be between 1000 and 400 and 1400 AD, somewhere in that 400-year period, or possibly way less, but somewhere in there. At that time, we didn't have the Dakota tribes and the Iowa, etc. So we talk about it this way on purpose because those are the people who have come down the line from the people who dug the holes. So that's as close as we can get. What we do know, though, from other archaeological work, is that the ring of villages here that I'm showing you in this map, from Red Wing and Blue Earth and the upper Iowa River and over in La Crosse, these are all places with quantities of Grand Meadow Chert that suddenly appear in large amounts and almost always appear as either as either scrapers, the majority, or small projectile points. The scrapers at the Blue Earth Valley, there's a couple of sites there where over 90% of the scrapers that showed up in excavations came from stone found at the Grand Meadow Chert Quarry. The same thing at Red Wing at the Bryan site. Over 90% of the scrapers found there. These are close to concurrent villages. These are all within that time period that we cite as the possible range of use of the quarry, at 1000 AD to 1400 AD. But we'll be able to refine that more and more the more we're able to investigate additional villages and see what other excavations. The data from the upper Iowa villages, for instance, has not been calibrated to coincide with the Grand Meadow Chert questions. And so we need to still look forward to more work being done to help answer those questions. The thing about all those villages and in this ring is that the Grand Meadow Chert Quarry is in the center. And if people are coming here before going out to the seasonal hunt in the spring to get their toolkit set up, or if they're coming in again in the fall for a hunt, nonetheless, if they stop here on the way, there's a good chance they're going to meet people from other villages. And so, because it's a condensed amount of time, spring and fall, when you can be doing this work, and I'm guessing if people came, they stayed for a few days. This invites the opportunity to create another level of value to this site, which would be the potential for social interaction. We do think that people came from these different villages to this place at the same time, and that's a hypothesis that still needs to be tested and proven. But we know about the tendency towards feasting, gathering for feasts from archaeological work done in Red Wing, for instance, one of the sources for people who came to dig these holes. And chances are this has an additional advantage because it's more central. And it allows people from Red Wing to meet up with people from the Blue Earth Valley. Each of them are about 70 to 100 miles away, and interact and trade stories, trade pottery styles, which trade very quickly throughout that set of village areas that I showed you. Changes happen, and then they happen for all of those sites. For instance, pottery suddenly after 1000 starts becoming decorated in this manner, shaped differently, and tempered with shell. So the little white flakes you see in these pots are pieces of shell. Prior to around 1000, that didn't happen. They weren't using shells. They weren't using shells to hold the clay together. They were using bits of grit. And now that. Another change, of course, is in the arrows that are made at that same time. These are often by collectors called bird arrows. They're not. They're simply triangular, very small triangular points. Sorry, I don't have a scale, but small triangular points meant to be just simply more aerodynamic and more efficient with the bow and arrow technology. This is an example of what I was telling you about with the scrapers representing over 90% of the materials we see coming from that. Over 90% of them are from Grand Meadow Chert. The other thing that people traded and shared among themselves is the fact that all of those villages are on rivers, and as such, they've begun to learn to use the river mud as a way of replenishing the annual floods, replenishing the nutrients in the soils where they are growing corn, and suddenly they're growing much bigger and better corn. And they're growing beans and squash along with the corn. Those referred to as the three sisters sometimes. Those three plants growing together is a very efficient way of creating an excess crop. and that leads to population increases, which certainly happened. Another element that we're looking at is just what is the relationship of the Grand Meadow Chert quarry with other concurrent activities going on in that time frame, which of course includes the large city site at Cahokia, which had 20,000 people, was enormous on any scale, and had a huge pyramid that was as big as the pyramid at Giza, but made out of baskets of dirt. That place had an influence that is implied in this map, but it's certainly a factor in those changes in agriculture, possibly the changes in pottery, some of the other things we see. But by and large, the word here, Oniota, refers to a tradition that we're witnessing, which is the sites, the people that were living in villages at Red Wing and Cambria and the others may not have ever considered themselves to be very closely associated with Cahokia, but instead took advantage of traders coming through and of interactions to learn and improve on the corn that they had or on the pottery styles they were doing. And so there is some kind of relationship interaction going on throughout this whole region, all of which is, as you can see, most of which is the Mississippi drainage basin. And that is an extremely interesting thing to be looking at, is what exactly was going on at that time among all these different clusters of traditions, and in what way did they interact. I also want to just take a quick moment to talk about where we are now and what we're going to do next. And next is coming up soon, I'm happy to say. This is the map or air photo short of the Grand Meadow Chert Quarry Archaeological and Cultural Preserve. In other words, this land with this odd green shading and this kind of cut off diagonal here on the northeast corner, this is what the Archaeological Conservancy bought. This is 15 acres. They had seen it go on the National Register of Historic Places with and had been in conversations with Orrin Shane, who was an archaeologist from the Science Museum of Minnesota, who had been at my talk in 1981 and had been inspired by that. And I went off and did other non-archaeological things for a while, and Orrin was the lead archaeologist for the Science Museum. So they kind of took over the nurturing of the site. And with Maynard Green, they lobbied and got it on, did the work to get it on the National Register and to get it noticed for purchase. They tried to get the legislature to buy it, but the Archaeological Conservancy came in and saved this site for permanent preservation. This is what I wish I had back then. Now that I'm coming back into my original field of archaeology, I get to play with LiDAR, and we didn't have that before. I'm showing you this, though, to kind of impress you with how difficult our task it was. We assigned ourselves the idea of putting in a walking trail through this place. And the walking trail for the public needed to not go into any pit or interfere with any pit or put any potential archaeological research area at risk. And so you can see that's not an easy thing to do in this kind of a circumstance. We've just finished putting in the new trail. It's more than half handicapped accessible. It is, the parts in brown are pedestrian only. And our next step is to put up those signs that I've shown you. Those signs have all been produced. They're on their way to New York for manufacturing, and they will be installed by June 1st. So we intend to open the site to the general public after June 1st. And we have brought in some benches during the winter, of course, when we wouldn't disturb the site. But we've got 15 of these 1-ton benches. The thought behind that is we're hoping people will think of this as, even beyond being an archaeological and cultural preserve, that they'll think of it as a park. The county we're in has no county parks. And so already local residents are treating it that way. But I'm hoping that folks at the Mayo and Clinic and 20 miles away will see this as a nice place to come for respite and contemplation, in addition to education. When you are on a tour in the quarry, there's a spot for groups especially, but for anybody to just pause and sit and talk among themselves about what was going on here in the past. It's certainly a good place for an educator to do a class session with students. This is our talking circle along the way that we added. I also need to acknowledge just how extraordinarily lucky we've been to have this much help every step of the way. We've had volunteers from the community, from the local residents. We've had people contribute um, resources as well as time. The Grand Meadow High School sends a 10th grade class to our site every year for cleanup. And the township board gave us the go-ahead for the parking area. The TIPO offices obviously have been instrumental in making sure that we're doing things properly. Everybody else on here has been absolutely significant. I should put an asterisk next to sentence to serve. These people, the guy who runs the teams, if you know what sentence to serve is, it's people choosing to do work instead of sit in a jail cell. And so the work they do is to the benefit of the public in the county. And Matt Ziebel, who's the leader here, has given us a day a week in the nice months of the year for the last 4 years, which has been a terrific amount of match we've been able to calculate for the grants we've gotten. We've had 4 legacy grants to do this work. That's been our major source of funds, along with donations from friends and people in the county and people interested in preserving this site, sort of an archaeological site. Primarily, those donations are going to an endowment that we started 2 years ago, because we want to make sure that in addition to the TAC preservation, we have the means to maintain and sustain the site in perpetuity. So I'm going to turn it back to Susan for questions, and let's, oh, I'm sorry, actually, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Franky, but let me get out of share for you, Franky, and let you take over for me here.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. I want to leave a few minutes for Dan to speak as well. So I just wanted to talk on the importance of early and meaningful consultation and collaboration, which was demonstrated through Tom and the Archaeological Conservancy approaching the Prairie Island very early in the conceptual process of this project. And on our end, what we had to do was we had to convince not only our tribal elders about the importance of this, but our tribal leaders as well. And so one of the things that helped us be able to do that is direct engagement with our tribal elders, subject matter experts in our community, and also working with our education department. A lot of the signage that you see and the dual language signage that you see was initiated through our educators and our through our education department, collaborating with the other education leaders from the 3 other Dakota communities. So it was a joint collaboration on that level. And it also demonstrated the importance of having tribal voices at the table throughout the entire planning process. A lot of the trail design was heavily influenced by the site visits that were conducted by the elders and youth throughout the years leading up to this. And also I wanted to touch on the fact that early in our strategic approach, Prairie Island was identified as the lead agency to outreach with other tribal communities. And that allowed us to use our established relationships specifically with our partner tribes like the Ho-Chunk and the Iowa tribe. And I want to take a minute just to recognize Lance Foster and his contributions towards this project. For some of you who are familiar with Lance, Lance passed away recently, and that leaves a big void in our area of historic and cultural preservation. But when I was thinking about what I wanted to say about Lance today was when we would often discuss this project, Lance would say, "I'm trusting that you guys will do the right thing, taking the lead as the Dakota tribe." And I didn't realize how big of an honor that was until we had the absence of Lance at the table. And so having those trusted relationships early and allowing tribes to lead certain aspects of this effort demonstrated to be a very powerful component for this. And what it ultimately allowed us to do is it allowed the Prairie Island Indian community to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Mower County, our trusted partners at Mower County, and with the Archaeological Conservancy. And so not only did we have the blessing from our tribal elders, our educators, but also from our political leaders as well. And with that, I just wanted to leave a few moments for Dan to talk about some of the wonderful contributions that he has brought forth to the project.
I didn't alert Dan to prepare something. I rather just suggested that he be available for questions. So I do want to lead off though, Dan, if you can turn on your camera and mic. I have a question for you. Because I've been intrigued by this. Dan co-authored 2 articles with me and in the beginning, and or I with him really. But in one of them, I was really impressed with you talking about the degree to which Grand Meadow Chert has a distinct advantage as a research indicator, as a research tool to indicate community interactions. So I just wanted you to kind of follow up on that and tell us why Grand Meadow Chert has that unique capacity.
Oh, sure. There are many different kinds of stone in Minnesota that can be used to make stone tools. And many of them are in glaciated parts of Minnesota where the glaciers have spread those materials across the state. Grand Meadow Chert, the Grand Meadow Quarry, is in a place at the edge of the driftless zone where glaciers haven't displaced material. And if you find Grand Meadow Chert almost anywhere else in Minnesota, it's because people brought it there. The other reason it's a really useful material for studying the way people interacted with the resource is it has some characteristics that distinguish it from other types of stone in the region. It's fossiliferous. The fossils in it are from the Devonian period. So it's a distinctive community of fossils that were living in a shallow sea down on the southern border with Iowa. And the color, the banding, the fossils make it easily identifiable from other materials so that when you can recognize it on a site 100 miles away, you can be pretty certain it came from the Grand Meadow Chert quarry. So it's useful for studying exchange and trade and travel of people across Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you. Susan, do you have any questions yet? Or I've got one more thing I'd be happy to bring up if you have a free moment.
You've got quite a few questions. Do you want to entertain a few of those? And then if we have an extra few
That's
minutes.
what we'll do.
Perfect.
Yes.
A couple of questions. Ryan Howell made a comment early on. He said, Tom, Grand Meadow Chert shows up in Wisconsin only in the earliest Oneota villages in AD 1200 to 1300 in Wisconsin. It's almost unknown in other periods or any other area. It seems directly tied to the late pre-contact bison hunts onto the Minnesota prairies. And I'm pretty sure that he made that comment before you showed the slide that had the bison and that piece of your talk. But do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, I'm hearing some of the things. I think he's certainly right in the observation. And Ernie Boatsart is the right person to be talking to about that for him as well. But I'm holding open the possibility that it's not just the later part of the Oneota tradition, but also possibly earlier. In part because it wasn't just discovered then; it had been an ongoing source of materials right up to the time the first pits were dug. And so at some point, there's an increased demand that may just simply be from populations along those villages that are close to and the ones digging. And that would mean that some of the extraction of the stone was happening through pits far earlier than when it would show up through a trade network elsewhere. So I'm just trying to, I wasn't quite, did he say earliest in Wisconsin or latest at sites?
Let me go back and find.
I think he may have said earliest, so he might be in agreement with me about that.
Earliest Oneota villages, 1200 to 1300.
I think the concentration of research and carbon-14 dates at villages that show the largest quantity of Grand Meadow Chert scrapers cluster in the 1100s. And so that's what we see closer to the core area.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I want to do a quick shout out to Lindsay. She did a great job of answering a couple of questions. I will make sure that all of you receive her answers also in written format so you can see what she answered. But Al Tonetti has been busy. He's got another question. Are they heat treating the material in or near the quarry? Is there any evidence of thermal features in the vicinity of the quarries? Magnetic gradiometry might be useful to discover those.
Dan, why don't you turn your mic back on? I'll let you start that answer, and then I've got something to show.
Oh, sure. There isn't a lot of indication of heat treatment. The chert, the way it comes out of the ground, is well suited for flint knapping. And in fact, the major use of the chert is for height scraping tools. And I think having a tough, resilient edge is one of the characteristics of this stone that was the reason that it was used so intensively for height scraping tools. There is a diagnostic color change. You get some reddening, particularly in areas that are iron stained, but most Grand Meadow chert isn't heat treated. When you see it in a village or a quarry area, you don't know whether it was incidental or intentional.
Good.
Thank you, Dan.
Let me, Susan, I'm going to grab the share again for just a quick second.
Sure.
And pull this back up. This is an image from earlier that was meant to show the just the village the people visiting from villages, but the site as we saw it. But we purposefully put in a pit over here with smoke coming out. This is meant to bring up the question of heat treating. If there's some small percentage of Grand Meadow chert that's heat treated, as there is, we wanted to remember to mention it. And so I had the artist put that there. But that's also a spot where Dan found heat treated chert when doing a survey or on that side of the creek inside the site property. You recall that, Dan? Yeah. Okay. So good. What we did too was take samples of Grand Meadow chert on the left, untouched, and then I heat treated them myself, some on the right. So ones that match up, same samples from the same source. And so the heat treated ones on the right and the show that coloration Dan was talking about, and the ones on the left are untouched. What we then did is go to the Science Museum, and they had a relationship with 3M, and we used their electron microscope photographs to show the difference between, on the left, untreated stone, and on the right, what heat treatment does. It kind of melts that surface into a more glassine type surface. But that's showing exactly what happens with Grand Meadow chert. Okay.
All right. Are you ready for the next one?
Sure.
All right. How deep do you think they had to dig at the preserve to find the chert? How far down?
Yep, we think the chert was just slightly below the surface at the creek. So the first holes were within 2 feet. The holes that are left behind in the woods are there today because farmers in the 1800s and early 1900s couldn't fill them in. They were so deep that they just left them. And so a lot of that area was probably woods into the early 20th century. But the plot of land we're on is protected because the owner just wanted to have a little spot for his kids to go hunting. And they've been a century farm, so that that family is still, the Thorson family is still protecting that site, or were until they sold it to TAC. The depth at the furthest north point, in other words, the deepest part, the distance between the surface and the actual flat bed of chert down below is at least 12 feet. I'm guessing closer to 15. And some of the pits have been sloughed in, filled in, and we really don't know where the bottom is in some of those pits. But I would say by and large, it's 12 to 15 feet at the deepest.
Okay, so the next question relates to what you were just talking about. Paul Katz is interested in knowing, have you actually cleaned out or excavated any of the pits in order to see the original pit walls? Did you find any quarrying tools?
We have not done any subsurface work except that one original trench. And other than that, we're waiting until we can put together a large research project, and the plan is underway right now. The way in which we can see all these pits now is that in addition to cutting out all the buckthorn and removing it, we've also burned the site, and that helped. And then, as I mentioned, the team from the county sentenced to serve has been coming in constantly with chainsaws and things to clean the site up. We couldn't pull any plants out, but we can keep them cut to the quick. And that's going to go on throughout the rest of the life of the quarry, I think. Not all the pits. There's 100 pits in there. And we think there were probably about 2,000 originally in the quarry site, but there's 100 of them still inside the woods. And those are pristine, of course. And so we're protecting them as best we can, but we will make them visible to people walking the trail. Probably a dozen of them will be kept clean all the time.
Awesome. Ryan has a question. How far does Grand Meadow Chert distribute across Minnesota and Iowa? Does it seem to focus on any particular temporal period and date range in pre-contact areas?
Dan, if you want to join me for this one too. It's been found in 52 counties in Minnesota. Certainly all of them in the southern, and all of those that are in the southern tier especially. But in Wisconsin, especially western Wisconsin, in northern Iowa, in South Dakota, but we really don't have a lot of data ranging beyond that. We haven't had a team go out and start investigating collections in other places, which would be great to see happen. Dan, go ahead.
Sometimes material might not be known in another in an adjacent state or provinces of Canada, and I think the awareness of this material is increasing, and we'll learn more about the further places that it was used. Within Minnesota, it has a tendency of decreasing in percentage by like a half for every approximately 85 kilometers from the site. So even at great distances, it'll show up in small amounts, basically all over the state of Minnesota. So it should show up in small quantities in places that adjoin Minnesota.
All right.
Question for
You've had a couple of comments that I want to just real quickly go through just to honor them. Richard is sharing, he says there's a small amount of Grand Meadow Chert debitage found at Maple Ridge site in Sauk County, Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Christina is interested in possible volunteer opportunities. And so I shared your email addresses with her. And with anybody else, check the chat, everybody, and you'll see them in there, so you can contact any of our speakers tonight if you're interested in knowing about things like that. Gail commented to Franky, thank you for mentioning Lance. He's a mighty force in interpretation for the cultures in many states. So a shout out to Franky. Jane, I think you answered this already, but you might want to speak to it again. Jane's asking about the coloring of chert. With the Conservancy, we went to a chert quarry in Port Ancient in Ohio, and it was beautifully varied in reds and blues. But what you showed us today is uniformly gray for the most part. Do you want to add anything to what you already shared, or do we cover it?
That is Dan, go ahead. But that's a beautiful chert. I know exactly what she's talking about, but no, ours is just gray with some coloring to the greenish khaki green. Go ahead, Dan. Thanks.
It has a characteristic color. It's kind of an olive gray. And something that's actually more distinctive about the color is right underneath the cortex, it has like a rind, like a melon. It's a little bit lighter color. And the chert right underneath the cortex tends to be the highest quality. So end scrapers often show remnants of the cortex and then that lighter band and then the olive gray chert underneath. So it gives it a really distinctive appearance, especially to those end scrapers.
Thank you for that.
Susan, would it help if I put the addresses up for people to just take a
Oh,
quick
sure. If you want
screenshot
to
if
do
somebody wants to take a photograph of it?
that would be great. There,
Go ahead.
well, while you're taking pictures or screenshots of those, if you didn't capture them from the chat, I want to just go through. There's a few more comments, Tom, that I will send to you, Frankie and Dan, just so that you could see them. Ivy's asking, let's make this the last question since we're right at 6. If the flyover image, in the flyover image, it looked like there was a historic cemetery. Is there any information related to the quarry related to that disturbance? Is there any kind of connection with that?
They have been generous to us. They're allowing us to use their parking strip as an overflow parking for us. But also they have a gigantic pile of rock that comes from 170 years of digging graves. And they would, of course, keep the dirt for refill, but they would take the bottom part of each hole and pile it in the corner. Well, that's got a lot of Grand Meadow chert in it. And they invited us to go ahead and take all we wanted. So we've actually been screening it and just making sure there's nothing of cultural value in there. But we've been using that as a source of chert that we can share with nappers and with interested people, especially educators, wanting to have a piece of Grand Meadow chert to show in a classroom. So that's the relationship with the cemetery. It was put right in the middle of the quarry, and they've been really gracious about sharing that with us.
What a great use of that chert. That's a great idea. All right, we are past our time, and I like to be timely with this. Andy's asked a great question that I'm going to pose to Tom, Dan, and Frankie via email and ask them to respond to it. It's just in regards to what are your next steps. So that would be a great thing for you to write down for me, and we'll share that with everybody so that they know what's going to happen next and how to follow it.
Fine.
Sound okay?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm incredibly grateful to have had you, all 3 of you, on tonight. Thank you, all of you. If Frankie, you want to pop back in and say goodnight, or Dan, we are very pleased to learn about this amazing project and to know that it is almost to fruition. I hope you'll be sharing photos and videos with us once those signs get put in. Lindsay, thank you very much for being my other half and helping answer those questions. We have another lecture coming up next month where we're going to be hearing from one of the Conservancy board members who is also a very interesting person who is doing a project with his Indigenous peoples in Yellowstone and knows an awful lot about that area. So come back and hear from Shane Doyle with that presentation. So unless the rest of you have anything else to say, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you so much for coming.